everybody, it's Tom Christie back in the painting studio. It's a beautiful sunny morning in Nebraska. I just saw thousands of snow geese fly over, which is always a joy to see that harbinger of the coming of spring as they're headed up north, I assume. And this morning we're going to start the first session of painting this. It's not a miniature, but it's smaller than life-size Drake Wigeon in kind of a calling position. It's 9-inch long body as a frame of reference from the breast to the tip of the tail. I'm using this picture as an inspiration. So we'll get him painted. The first thing I want to do is put a base coat on, put a little bit of texture on the bird to help with some of the dry brush techniques. I'm also going to comb vermiculation on this bird. So we'll get a lot of different techniques in this video series and hopefully come up with a nice looking drake when we're done. As a reminder, this bird is being donated to the Pacific Flyway Decoy Association. They're having a raffle. There are, I think, 3 other carvings involved in that raffle, and they're going to pick the winner at the show in July. So if you're curious about that and you might want to check out the raffle and get involved in that, it's a way to donate to the Pacific Flyway Decoy Association. It's a way to support the show, and that's why I'm doing it. They're a long-standing show in California. Sacramento show has been around a long time, a lot of good people out there, and I wanted to help out. So let's get started. I'll bring the camera in. We're going to do a base coat first, as I mentioned. And if you're enjoying my channel, please hit the subscribe button. That does help me out as I continue to build this channel with free resources for people that might want to carve a wildfowl of any kind. Okay, let's get going. All right, I've got a mixture of Liquitex gesso, maybe 50% of that, 50% Liquitex heavy body acrylic. I picked burnt umber because the mix gives me kind of a neutral brownish gray tint. And I'm going to paint that on the bird and then use synthetic sponge, just cheap packing sponge, to put a little bit of texture on the feathered portions of the bird. We'll leave the bill nice and smooth, and we'll get that going. The consistency of this material is a little like toothpaste, maybe a little thinner than that, but pretty heavy. So I'm just going to use a brush here, and I've got a 1-inch wide angled brush. See if I'm in the camera here. I'm going to paint that on right over the eyes, and I'm going to go ahead and paint the bill as well, just to give it a base coat of material. And make sure that I don't have too many brush marks as I'm putting this on, and I don't want to fill up any of the details either, so we'll keep this relatively thin on the bill. Okay, and now we can start working on the feathered portions of the bird. I like to go a little section at a time so the material doesn't dry out on me. I'm going to put a little on the palette here. Use a piece of packing sponge and work it into the sponge, and then dab that on. And that is a little too rough, but the more you work this, the finer the texture will get. And I'm going to work to get a nice consistent texture all over the bird, right up to the bill there. So this is kind of boring to watch, but I wanted to show you enough of it that you get a feel for how I'm going to texture this bird, and I'll get this done and then come back. Just a quick look at the textured bird, and I'll let that first coat dry, go back and probably give it a second coat just to make sure the texture is consistent throughout. And then we can begin work on combing the vermiculation on the bird. Okay, I've marked areas on the bird that I want to focus on with my chalk pencil, and I want to vermiculate the scapulars here, so I've kind of defined where they overlay the tertials. So we'll start right there, and I'm going to use the same mix we used for the texturing. I'm going to start on the scapulars here, a little angle brush, and I'm just loading in some of that material into the shape of these scapulars. Trying to leave enough material on there that when I pull my comb through, it's going to leave the ridge that I'm looking for. And I'm going to do half of the rear section here first, because I don't want this material to dry out as I'm working, so I'm just going to do this half of the back first. And I'll do the cape as we go here. Okay, hopefully I've got enough material on there. Now I've got a relatively fine comb. It looks like I need more material on there. This is the balance that you always run into, is how much is too much, how much is not enough. Kind of like the old prune commercial for you older folks out there. All right, enough humor. Now I'm just going to drag the comb through there. I'm going to take care of that down there later. I'm going to wipe the comb off in between strokes here. Put some zigs and zags in. Go back over an area is fine, as long as the material hasn't dried. You can still work with it. I'm not trying to form individual feathers here. This is meant to be kind of a combing or a gunning style paint job, so we don't need to worry about individual feathers in the combing process, other than those scapulars at the back where we want to stop the combing. Okay, I'm wiping my comb off on a paper towel, and then I'm going to come back with just a dry brush here and spread this material out that I combed onto the lower area. I'm going to deal with that later. Get that material off the speculum feathers there too. All right, I'm going to keep going, adding more material now while this material is still fresh. I'm just going to show a portion of this combing and then give you the process and kind of some of the tips, and then move on. I'm going to go ahead and start around the cape here as well. And then there's a little vermiculation that'll run around the front, the lower part of the neck there. All right, back to the comb. Looks like I'm lacking a little material right there, so I'm going to get a little material on the comb before I go there. I need more material on the cape here. I didn't get enough material on there. So just go back and add some more. And I'm going to blend that in then to the scapulars here. Need to unload the comb, paper towel. If there's too much paint in the comb, the ridges won't be sharp. And that'll be a problem when you go to finish the paint. If the ridges aren't nice and clean and sharp, it's going to look messy. Now I'm at the back of the neck here, pretty tight quarters. I'm just using short little strokes and try to get some vermiculation right up there against the lower part of the neck, and then fan that out, because we want to turn the corner here for this vermiculation that's going to go around the front of the neck. Going to get this material off of here before it dries again. So you get the picture. Now I'm going to go over the other side and pick that up, and then I'll come back and we'll do the side pocket, the top of the side pockets, and this little band around the front. While I'm here, I'm just going to pick this up too. I don't want this area vermiculated, where that white patch is. So get material out of there. Okay, I put some material around the neckline there, and I'm just going to go around the corner here and fade that out into the breast. Pretty tight quarters here. I'm just going back and forth so I make sure I have enough material on there to leave some ridges. Let's try that again. Go on the other side and work from this direction. Try to tie into those previous lines and then tie into that. That looks pretty good. I'm going to pull these down a little bit and fade them out. And I think I got a little low over here. So I'm just going to go back with a brush and brush those out and blend it into the surrounding area. Try to get rid of any ridges that'll be hard to paint over. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to dry this with the hair dryer, and then we'll do the upper side of the side pockets. Now I want to add some vermiculation just on the upper side of the side pocket. So I'm going to load up some material up there. And then thin that out, fade it out as we go down the side pocket here. I'm just going to make that thin. Working in small scale like this, smaller scale than life size, has its own challenges because your things are just smaller and they're harder to work with, at least in this combing process. Try to make sure I have enough material up there on the top edge so I can pull it down. Let's give that a try. I'm going to start at the top and just kind of angle back and pull that down. Start at the top, angle back. Put a little bit of curvature in there. And as we get up to the front here, start curling around towards the breast feathers. Like that. And then what I'll do is, again, get a dry brush. And I don't want to leave any ridges. Like right here is a little bit of a ridge, so I'm just going to pull that out and blend it into the textured area. Because when we come over the top of that with whatever color of paint that we're dragging on the vermiculation to highlight it, I don't want to highlight these ridges down here, so we'll just get them out of the way. Okay, I'll do the other side pocket and then come back. All right, just a quick look at the combing in some overhead lighting. See, it comes down to about here on the side pocket, wraps around the front. To the other side, and then the back. It's all combed to those, the rear edge of the scapulars back there. We'll let that dry and then we can add some base colors. Just another note I thought of, once that material is dry, if there's a spot where you missed or the combing isn't clear, you can always go back, add a little material, comb back through it, but you've got to make sure the base combing is dry so you don't pull that apart or make a mess. All right, I've mixed up the body base color, which is kind of this dusty plum rose color. And that's 70% white gesso, 15% brown earth, 5% raw umber, 5% raw sienna, 5% ultramarine blue to give us this plum color, and I'm going to paint that on the majority of the bird. Let's swing down here. I'm going to start on the side pocket. And this may take a couple of coats to go over the base coat, although the base coat is similar in value, so maybe not. So I'll paint the side pockets, the breast up to the neck there, and the scapulars back to here in this base color. And then I'll be back. On the breast of the bird, I want to go with just a little bit more of a plum value. So I'm adding some ultramarine blue and diox purple to that original color. And this is pretty subtle, but I want this breast to be a little bit darker and a little bit of a plum shade. I need a little more purple in that mix. I don't want to get day glow purple here, but that's better. And I'm going to fade that into the side pocket then. By just lightly brushing over that area. And create a blend. Same thing here. And you can play around with this value. If it's too purple, like this is, I think, turning out to be a little too dark, I'm going to come back with more of the base color and mix that in. Just a quick look at slightly darker, more plum colored breast, and then fades out to the body color we started with. I've got an off-white mixture, which is primarily gesso with a little bit of raw umber to just knock down the brightness a bit. And I'm going to paint this white patch on the back, on the side of the rump here. And this will definitely take 2 or 3 coats to cover this gray base material. And then I'll also use a detail brush and fill in this white shoulder marking. For the head base color, I've got 80% gesso with 10% each of raw umber and raw sienna to give us this kind of buff color. I'm going to paint that on and keep the paint thin on the edges here so we don't have a line of paint that we're trying to disguise later. Just keep it soft. And in this high head position, I'm seeing buff color down here on the neck behind. And the eye patch kind of fades out back here. So that's the way I'm going to paint this. Next, I've penciled in kind of quill lines on the tertials, and the lower portion of these tertial feathers we're going to paint carbon black. So I've got my detail brush and just going to focus on the lower side of each of these tertials. And I'm also going to paint this tail covert area up to the white patch and the supporting portion of the primaries here back to the tail feathers. So I'll fill that in. And then come back. Taking the off-white and adding a little yellow oxide to it just to make it more of a cream color. And I'm going to paint that on the top here. Just adding a little more of the off-white so it doesn't get too yellow. I'm just going to softly scrub that into this value and then take it back. Center of the head. This will take several coats to cover. So I'm following the top of that eye patch and then bringing this to a point back here, and it fades out. And again, on the edges, I'm just using my brush to kind of softly stipple and create at least a partial blend there. For the base on the eye patch, I'm using carbon black mixed with phthalo green. So it's a very dark value with just a hint of green. And I'm going to try to keep that soft on the edges by just scrubbing lightly in that right along the edge here. And then back here, I want to fade that into the buff color. And I'm just doing that by lifting up on the brush as I push back into that area. All right, I've got a gray value made from a mix of burnt umber, white gesso, and just a touch of carbon black. And I'm going to use that to paint the upper portion of these tertials, kind of a warm gray value. I'm going to use that same color of gray to paint the top and bottom side of the tail. Now I've added a little more burnt umber to that mix, and I'm going to block in the primaries, a little more of a brown hue here. So again, that's the tail mix of burnt umber, white gesso, touch of carbon black, but more burnt umber in this mix. For this light feather, I'm going to use Nimbus Gray. While that's still wet, I'm going to use white gesso in a little small filbert and just scrub in a lighter edge near the back of that feather and blend that into the gray going forward. And then we'll put a black edge on that feather, but from the looks of my reference, this gets a little lighter near the back, kind of a silvery gray tone, and then lightens up. Now I've got carbon black. I'm just going to pull the edge of that feather black. Like that. For the upper mandible, I've got a little cobalt blue, white gesso, just a very slight amount of blue, and then just a little bit of black to knock that more towards the gray side. And I'm going to coat the upper mandible a couple of times with that pale blue color. For the inside of the upper mandible, I just painted that with a mixture of burnt umber and Norwegian orange, including the throat back there. The tongue is going to be a fleshy pink color, so I just wanted a dark value there, not try to put too much detail in that area. For the tongue, I'm using Norwegian orange mixed with white gesso and then some raw umber to tone it down a bit. And I'll give this a couple of coats. And then the lower mandible is going to be black. Now I've got a detail brush, and I'm going to go in and paint the lower mandible carbon black. Pretty meticulous work here at this small scale. I'm also going to paint this connecting membrane between the upper and lower mandible carbon black. So I'll get that done and then come back. And just a quick look at the base coated bill. Those various colors and black underneath. Looks like I need to reinforce that a bit. Here's just a quick look at the bird where we stand after base coating, just in case you need that for reference before we move on. Okay, everybody, that's a good place to stop session 1. I don't want these videos to get too long, and we've got the bird base coated. In the next session, we'll go into the details and really finalize the paint job on this Calling Drake Wigeon. Until then, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you.